Welcome. My name is Des Cahill. I'm Director of Research for Legal Week Intelligence, and today we are talking about the Hayes Salary Survey 2011. With me in the studio is Yvonne Smyth, who is Managing Director of Hayes Legal. Welcome, Yvonne.
Hello.
So, what do you think will be the main changes in lawyers' basic reward packages over the last 12 months or the next 12 months?
We're not expecting a huge amount of change, actually. There is increasing demand, and relative to this time last year, certainly there are more opportunities around. But typically, one of the big factors that drive salary changes and packages is movement of lawyers and issues around retention and attraction and kind of bidding wars for talent.
Sure.
I don't think the opportunities are so plentiful yet that we're going to see overall packages drive upwards. Most law firms are saying that salaries and packages are going to stay broadly static, and they're not expecting significant changes. But quiet words are certainly being had, as I say, off radar to key individuals in law firms to let them know that actually there will be opportunities for them to affect an increase in their all-round pay because they are highly valued employees.
Interesting. In terms of the the amount of bonuses, I mean, there's been lots of talk about bonuses as a part and package of overall reward packages, for example. Is that something that you think is increasing as a general percentage of private practice, or is it something that's, as you seem to indicate, and from the first few minutes, that is remaining mostly the same?
What we're seeing is that probably there's an element of variable pay at between about 5 and 15%. Again, in firms in London, that starts from quite an early age, probably kind of 1 year qualified. And the more senior you become, it moves more towards the kind of 15 to 20% mark. Once you go out of bandings and you're in, if you like, the antechamber for partnership, then a percentage up to about 40% can be quite variable.
Sure. And do you think that, as you were indicating, the freezing of the sort of pay structure for people in private practice over the last year or so, has that led to an increase of people's interest in moving in-house and perhaps gaining a different proportion of their overall package as a bonus or as a commission structure basis?
Yeah. The interest in moving in-house has always been there, and that is likely to continue. People move in-house for all sorts of different reasons. They want to get closer to a business. Sometimes they move for lifestyle reasons. It is seen as very often a more rounded role. They don't want to follow the partnership track. Is pay fueling that interest? Not really, not right now. There is always an interest in practice, particularly for banking and finance lawyers and transactional lawyers, to go to the investment banking market, because the opportunity to earn significant bonuses is always there. Sure. So certainly that's there, but the reasons why lawyers want to move in-house are pretty much what they've always been. I think the additional element now is that actually a lot of lawyers don't see practice with the same, as offering the same level of security as perhaps they once did, given the quite dramatic streamlining we've seen over the last 18 months. So they possibly see a move in-house as being more secure career-wise.
As a sort of corollary of the shrinking, if you like, the private practice market in the UK, has that led to more people looking abroad in terms of opportunities for international jobs? And Australia and Asia obviously would be, and the Middle East would be key there. Yes,
I mean, we're seeing mobility increase across the board. So there is certainly an export market coming out of the UK, which I'll come on to. But the mobility of, for example, lawyers coming out of Australia and New Zealand and moving, to the offshore jurisdictions or into Asia, that's being fueled at the moment. The Middle East remains hungry for lawyers. In terms of the UK specifically, again, we're seeing a real export market kind of coming through because opportunities are there once again. And to a degree, lawyers have lost some confidence in the security that staying in the UK offers. Sure. So that is a very real alternative for lawyers, to follow, a very kind of real alternative path. And whether that is a medium-term move or a long-term move it's still early days to see. But we've got a lot of lawyers going into the Middle East, as I say, into the offshore jurisdictions, going overseas to Australia and New Zealand and Hong Kong. Places like China, you absolutely need the language skills, so there's not a huge amount of demand for expats. But interestingly, we're seeing some of the BRIC countries coming through at the moment where they're interested in good transactional lawyers. So Russia is very active at the moment. India, interestingly, is kind of coming through. And as a hub, as an English-speaking hub, we see Singapore as being very active as well.
I mean, are you noticing any trends, for example, I'm thinking about the NQ market or the PQE 1 to 3 market? I mean, it's been, obviously those people in those particular areas will be somewhat downhearted by the recent experiences in terms of the streamlining of law firms and the reduction of opportunities. And if they are still on the job, I suspect they'll be still pretty happy. But general trends in terms of the mobility of those types of levels of NQ and 1 to 3?
Yeah. If we look at the NQ level at the moment, September 2009, 60% or so of trainees were kept on and offered qualified roles. In the latest March intake, that's close to 80 to 90%. So it's a better market for newly qualifieds, and we expect that to continue into September. Historically, there was always an expectation that year on year newly qualified salaries would go up. And we had this concertina effect where we had overheated salaries starting with the newly qualifieds, running through to 1 to 3 years qualified, where salaries went up kind of exponentially year on year, and then really slowed down significantly. So the difference between what a 4-year qualified lawyer would earn and a 7-year qualified lawyer was not that much, which was causing a real problem. And of course, what was fueling that was this merry-go-round of people kind of going to the highest bidder. And so a newly qualified lawyer, if they didn't get their first choice at their firm, they would know that there would be another opportunity, for them to move. That hasn't been the case over the last couple of years. So the heat's been taken out of that newly qualified rating and that bidding war, that war to kind of keep talent, really. And that's kind of cascaded upwards because, again, there hasn't been the movement of lawyers, and therefore all of those levels have stayed broadly static, which is causing a real problem because lawyers are frustrated because someone who is 3 years qualified hasn't really seen their salary go up very much for the last 2 to 3 years. And that's why we're seeing more registrations, because there's now a recognition that actually there are more opportunities out there. And to a degree, some candidate confidence is returning.
Sure. I mean, certainly in this sort of employee satisfaction surveys, there seems to be several indications that people feel that they're working harder for, in effect, less money because their salaries have been frozen for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether, the bite points or the jump points, for example, where people decide to leave a firm and seek a job elsewhere has changed quite dramatically, and there are more of them perhaps than there used to be just at, at certain levels that people would think about jumping ship, but now it's practically at every single level.
I think the interest has always been there, but so much of this is fueled by kind of candidate confidence and options.
Sure.
The options are now there, and therefore people are starting to move again. This time last year, someone was just grateful to have a job, and so there was very little movement. But certainly, again, it depends where you want to go, but the demand has always been greatest at the 2 to 4 year mark. For people moving, they can add the most value there from day one. That's when lawyers start to look about going in-house. And as I say, they're kind of valuable to any future employer because they kind of know what they're doing. That's always been the case. We're still seeing little demand at the kind of newly qualified to 1 year level. And I think most lawyers, if they can stay in their current role, they will at the moment because their choices will be limited if they look outside.
Okay. In the in-house sector, Yvonne, I mean, obviously bonus historically has been a much bigger, I should say, percentage of pay. Does that vary quite a lot from sector to sector, from industry to industry?
Certainly there's an expectation when you move in-house that you will receive some kind of bonus. Most lawyers who move in-house do take a cut in their basic pay. and that's compensated for through a more generous benefits package. The bonus element will vary depending on organisation. If we look at financial services first of all, as a general rule, the higher the risk, the more aggressive the organisation and the higher risks it takes, the higher your percentage of bonus is. So, for example, if you were to join a hedge fund or a fund of funds, your bonus element will be significantly higher than if, for example, you are in a mainstream investment bank.
Sure.
In broadly the kind of commerce and industry market, there's an expectation again that there will be a drop in basic salary, that the bonus will be probably closer to kind of 20-25%, depending on a number of different factors which we can come on to. There are other elements such as car allowance, share options that feature quite heavily, and certainly are always factored into total reward.
I mean, just to round up at the end, I think it'd be quite interesting just to ask what you think would be, the major trends or developments in the next 12 months you think can see happening. I mean, obviously the legal services bill is a big talking point for a lot of people, but the way that sort of the distribution of legal services and the types of lawyers are structured currently in the legal services market, do you see anything radically changing in the next 12 months, 24 months, or will it be mostly the same?
I'd like to say there's going to be significant differences, and that the legal services bill will feature massively. I think that the impact of the legal services bill has been probably put on ice a little bit, having seen how dramatically certain law firms are affected by certain opportunities for revenue being just turned off and switched off. So I don't think that's going to be a massive feature. It will require a significant upturn in the market and in the economy to start to fuel some transactional teams where there is still significant underutilisation. I think the litigators will remain fairly busy. So I can't really see any significant hotspots where there's going to be very significant numbers being hired. I think what we will see is the natural attrition and general appetite to move and to improve oneself. That's going to start to create demand, which hasn't been there. And I think we'll start to see people moving, opportunities coming up through that, as opposed to it necessarily being kind of market-driven. I think it's going to be person-driven.
Okay. Do you think there'll be, in part, sort of almost like a polarisation of different skill sets? There'll be very high-level, very senior lawyers at partner level who give very much bet the company type of legal advice, and at the lower end, it'll be much more of a sort of paralegal scenario where you give someone who's much lower paid a certain number of tasks that you know they can fulfill, and that the costs for that are transparent, and the client's a lot happier as a result.
Yeah. Again, I think that law firms have had to look very closely at how they structured themselves over the course of the last couple of years, and clearly, associate numbers were cut into extremely heavily, partner numbers weren't, and paralegal numbers weren't. So that polarisation is definitely going to be a feature, I think, of the future. Clients, if they're paying good money, want to see a partner at the meeting. They don't necessarily want to see an associate. If a law firm is looking to leverage itself and could get a paralegal to do the work that historically a 1 or 2 year qualified lawyer would do, an experienced paralegal, they probably will. So I do think associates are going to be squeezed, and will certainly have to make sure that their contribution is recognised in a firm. So I can only see that trend continuing, which of course is something that the US firms have done for some time.
Absolutely. I mean, they've always been a little bit more clever about the use of paralegals, I think.
Absolutely.
Generally.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Yvonne.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching. This has been the Legal Week Q&A on the Hayes Salary Survey. Thank you. Bye-bye.